welcome to India Tonight. I'm Shibani Gharat. Now, Petroleum Minister Hardeep Singh Puri in an op-ed has stated that when the history of Gulf conflict comes to be written, one line deserves to survive. The largest energy shock in living memory reached our shores and 150 Crore Indian citizens were shielded. Chief Economic Advisor V. Anantha Nageshwaran has written that country's resilience was a result of the deliberate policy choices and years of economic preparation rather than good fortune. These two statements have put back the focus on the measures taken in India to mitigate the war impact. To discuss this, we are now joined in by M.K. Surana, former CMD, HPCL. He's joining in from Mumbai. And then we have Manoj Joshi. He's a foreign policy expert and distinguished fellow at ORF. He's joining us from New Delhi. Quickly over to you, Mr. Surana. Help us understand. Of course, the West Asia crisis has been a significant one, and that brought the world and the nations around the world to their knees. How well did India, mitigate the risk when it comes to some of the because considering population during this energy crisis that is still ongoing, by the way, because the conflict has not completely ended. But how well did India and the government guard the interests of the citizens during this crisis?
Yeah, good evening. So if you see the whole West Asia crisis, which started in February, in almost 4 months, and still we are not sure whether it is solved or still it is hanging on a delicate balance. But if we see last 4 months, we didn't see any time when there was no LPG in the kitchen or there was no petrol if the person is coming to fuel his vehicles at the petrol pumps. Also, when the war started, there was a bit concern not only of the availability but of the prices also. And we did see immediately after the war started, the prices went up from $70 or before war to almost $126 a barrel at the peak, but still it continued about 110, 105 for a long time. So it was almost around 65% increase in the prices. But what we saw is not only the people got the fuel, people got the kitchen LPG, but also the price impact was only up to the extent of around 7 to 10% versus a 65% increase in the crude prices. And that is not to account for the increase in crack, which was much more than the crude price, and the appreciation of dollar.
Mr. Joshi, quickly, your reaction to the statements given by Hardeep Singh Puri, because there was a point in time during the West Asia crisis just a few weeks ago when, LPG was not available. There was a lot of black marketing of LPG that was going on around that time. The restaurants had shut and cut down their menus to less than 50%. There were concerns about, whether cylinders will reach households or not. And we saw many businesses suffer too around that time. And then we saw petrol price and diesel price increase for 3 to 4 times in a matter of couple of weeks, and the prices have still not been rolled back in spite of the drop in the crude oil prices globally.
Well, both officials are right. India did survive a major global energy shock because the state had structurally diversified where it bought oil, actively absorbed the financial shock to protect the public, and built up heavy fiscal reserves in the years leading to it. But at the same time, when the petroleum minister and the CEA speak of resilience, they are looking at it through a macroeconomic lens. India may not have run out of fuel, there may not have been lines at the petrol pump, etc. But all of this still affected the average Indian consumer. So the Indian consumer found today the LPG is 90 rupees 90 higher. Petrol prices are much higher. You see, so the consumers they don't really mean the consumers were shielded 100%, but the consumers were shielded to a substantial extent. So we did not have a hyperinflation scenario or fuel rationing, which would have created major problems. So India didn't run out of fuel, as I said. But the deliberate policy choices still required a compromise. To protect the country's broader financial stability, the government allowed a partial price pass-through. So ultimately, while India may have been insulated from total energy collapse, regular citizens are still paying the price.
Right.
For a geopolitical instability.
Right. Regular citizens are absolutely still paying the price. Mr. Surana, over to you. So expanding and diversifying, the oil sources to over 40 countries, was it planned or reactive?
No, to two questions. One thing which you mentioned earlier. See, at every time as the situation developed, you have to make the choices. And however unpalatable it may be, the choices have to be made. And so what you mentioned about industrial LPG, you have to make a choice between domestic and industrial, and government didn't make a choice. The second part is, if the 65% increase, you have to pass something, and we did pass 7 to 10%. Now, coming back to this question about choices about the diversification, India had been diversifying over a period, but it has been increased more. So we have taken from, but ultimately the crude is procured on a techno-economic basis. So you may have the relationship, but you may not be buying. But this was a time when you may not get the most optimal crude, but you have to find where you can get it. And therefore, the choices of supplies, like we were not buying US earlier crude because it was not advantage to us by freight, but we did buy. We were not buying earlier from Russia, we have bought. We have bought from the countries which were not buying earlier at all. We were mostly dependent on Middle East. So to that extent, the diversification, not on the type of the sources, but also on the country of locations, origin, and the type of the crude also, the quality of the crude.
So when it comes to energy security, Mr. Surana, if I were to ask you, because as I mentioned, the crisis is not behind us, it's still ongoing. Like, what is one of the biggest lessons that, a developing nation like India has learned from this West Asia crisis on, to mitigate some of the risk, going forward when it comes to conflicts of this nature? Nobody expected Strait of Hormuz to be shut for such a long time, and all the energy experts are saying that the impact of this is going to last for like a couple of years, not just a few months. So what is the biggest lesson that India has learned?
So I would say two. First thing is, so far we were concentrating on the source of the energy, let's say oil, the location, the country, and the geopolitical risk there. But a new element which has come is the logistics supply line risk also. So you have to be very, very conscious about whether all these sources are not concentrated in a particular zone, which are passing through one common passage. So that's one lesson which we have learned. And so accordingly, our diversification has to include that part as well now. The second part is, you have to spend in the peace time some of the thing which was spent, like increasing in SPR, or increasing our refining capacity, or increasing in LPG, LNG or LPG import terminal. They have paid this time, but actually we may have to invest more on our strategic reserves, and also have to reduce our dependence on fossil. That means that we have to push the other sources of energy as well.
Foreign policy standpoint, what is the biggest lesson that India has learned during this crisis over the past couple of weeks, Mr. Joshi?
Well, I think, if you really look at study the entire crisis, don't forget that we were given accidental help by the Chinese. See, the Chinese reduced their oil imports, and this served as an accidental global price stabilizer. So while India took aggressive, active steps to diversify suppliers, China acted as a massive global macro buffer by stepping back from the market. So that prevented that $150 kind of macro shock and freed up alternate supply corridors. The big lesson that we need to learn is that China holds enough strategic oil reserves to pause imports for months. Whereas an E&Y analysis revealed that India's strategic crude inventories were just about 21 million barrels. That is the equivalent of 5 days of domestic consumption. Of course, there are commercial inventories also in oil marketing companies, private refineries, they also have. But our actual strategic petroleum reserves are very small. We need to do much more in building up our strategic petroleum reserve to deal with a situation like this.
Mr. Surana, is this 80-day oil reserve sufficient for prolonged global conflict going forward?
See, the Hormuz blockage of Hormuz has stalled. Probably anything is insufficient. So this war can go on for a long time, and if it is at a point which is a choke point, it can be anything. But no country can prepare for indefinite time of storages. So probably we need to think rationally. Definitely, what we have, we need to increase. There is no doubt about it. But we may also probably think of having the storage facilities for the other countries at our shores, which will have a benefit of reducing the risk of the passages, and we can increase our more things. So the question is, normally the people try to make 90 days the storage in the best of the cases in the world. That is what many of the European countries are having. So we need to look into it. For a country like India with such a large consumption, 90 days is a substantial time, a substantial quantity. But it will not only include the SPR, it also has to include the commercial inventories, which all the oil companies will have for their own operational reasons also. And that is available to us as such at the time of needs. So I think the put together at least 90 days should be there.
To what extent, also help us understand, Mr. To what extent did these price controls hurt the oil marketing companies' long-term finances?
See, the question is that if you know the way the oil economic works is that you've got a crude price and there is a value of the oil, the crude for different refineries, and there is a marketing margin. Now, definitely when your sale price is lesser than the crude price itself, so definitely there are under recoveries, and there was substantial. It was said at one point of time, it was touching even 1,000 crore a day. Now that has come down over a period of time with the softening of the crude prices. And because the volumes are large, just like a high price impact suddenly a day, a lower price will also benefit. So I would say that as of today, they will be just coming over the under recoveries part of it, but they would not have been able to recover fully the past part of it, because the price increase came almost 2 months later than the international prices gone up. So there will be an accumulated thing. Some of this would have been helped because just before the war there was a cushion. That cushion would have benefited them to mitigate some of the problems. But I would assume that there is under recovery accumulation, and which will be required to be recovered to help these companies. But if the crude prices remain benign, which is anticipated, in that case they will be able to recover quickly. But we should also not forget one of the things, we need to keep a watch of the exchange rate. And we also should assume that after the initial burst of the locked inventory which comes out, people may try to fill up the SPRs because the strategic reserves are at the lock bottom. And in that case, we may see again a rise in the crude price.
To what extent has this entire crisis expedited India's green energy transition? See, during 2020, the COVID pushed us to move everything digital, to shop online, to transact online. To what extent has it pushed the clean energy, the green energy, the EV transition in the country, Mr. Joshi?
I'm not so sure about that. I think that still the crisis has just... the crisis, first of all, didn't really hit us, as I said, at the hyper shock. The $150 price, etc. So I don't think that as far as the average citizen is concerned, he has really caught up with that. Prices have risen, certainly, but as Mr. Surana pointed out, there were 2 months, the prices started rising 2 months after the crisis. I think the process of electrification now, today, we have the Delhi government is giving certain incentives for EV purchases. So certainly has been some acceleration in that direction, but much, much more needs to be done, not only on the front of EV, but the electrification of the country, meaning the switch towards a high usage of electricity across the board, instead of instead of hydrocarbons.
Right. Mr. Surana, before we wrap this discussion, one final question, and a very important one that I want to ask you is, how vulnerable are we? Because the war is not behind us, with 30% of crude passing through the Strait of Hormuz. How vulnerable are we still? Because even if there is a ceasefire, and we have seen in the case of ceasefires in the past, they have been fragile. Statements made by Trump are, he has a habit of taking U-turns on some of those statements of the peace conversations proceeding, progressing forward. So how vulnerable are we still as there is no end to the conflict, so to speak?
I would say that if we handle this crisis for 4 months without getting any potential quantities from the Gulf, I think we have made the arrangements to handle the crisis. And therefore, to that extent, the vulnerability of us on this war has been substantially mitigated. That's number one. It may not be most optimal in the sense that the type of the crude which we are processing, the distillate yields we may be getting, the prices which may be paying, it may not be most optimal, but as far as supply is concerned of the crude oil, as far as running of the refinery is concerned, as far as ensuring the products availability to the consumers, I think we have substantially taken care of on this part of it. The vulnerability will be to the extent of how quickly we bring the optimality to the whole thing. That's one issue. And the second thing in future, will we continue to do the way we are doing, where we are getting from wherever we are getting, or we will have alternatives to get the Gulf crude, also some different routes. And I think there are efforts on recent visit to UAE, exit of UAE from the OPEC bloc will give us opportunities to have the long-term relationship with those countries, and UAE making efforts to have their bypass lines and using Fujairah port more, or the Saudi Arabia using the Red Sea more. That should give us opportunity to even get the Gulf oil without really being vulnerable to the Strait of Hormuz. So I think these are the works in process. And but immediate basis, if there was a sudden backlash, I think we are reasonably covered on that, and we have learned how to do that.
Right. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Thanks again for joining us today.